Hi, my name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED, and this is Q5 Ham Radio. I'm here today with Tom K2GO. I've already spoken to Tom once in what we call Part 1. I was really intrigued to learn about Tom's naval career as a pilot, but especially his travels around the world. His story took us to Wake Island, to Uruguay, to Panama, and all parts in between. And I promised him at the time that we'd have him back for part 2, and here we are. This episode is brought to you by DX Engineering, supporting amateur radio operators worldwide with the gear and expertise to get you on the air. Tom, thanks for joining us.
You're more than welcome. Good to see you again.
Well, Tom, I got to tell you, that was a hell of a story that you told before, and I've actually gotten a lot of feedback about that. Really, a lot of people are very intrigued by the experiences you've had. So let's continue. Can we just pick it up from where we left off?
Sure. We'll back up to the Navy part of it. I was very fortunate that when I graduated from college, I was selected to go to the Navy Flight School in Pensacola. So 9 days later, I'm down in Pensacola. So I go through flight training there. And I had, one time I was student of the month, so I did quite well. And when I got my wings, I was number 2 out of 17. And in the Navy, throughout the career, you're compared to your fellow officers, and your ranking is based on your performance. Okay, so they asked me when I got my wings, would I go back to being an instructor for 1 year because they desperately needed guys. So I did that. So I was in Meridian, Mississippi, and I was training in the T2. I was teaching advanced instruments, aerobatics, and formation flying, because in the Navy you always go with someone else, usually at least a 2-plane, or as the Air Force would say, a 2-ship, and many times a 4-ship. Okay, so we went everywhere with formation. So I did that, and then later moved out to assigned to a squadron there in Miramar, where I flew the A4 and F8. Loved the F8. It was one of the neatest airplanes I've ever flown in my life. It's a single-seat fighter that did extraordinarily well over in Vietnam against the MiGs. Then they decided to boneyard our airplane, so then I was, in essence, without a job, and I wound up being assigned to Whidbey Island, where I flew A6s, and also underwent training as a landing signal officer, or what they call LSO, or in the old days of World War II and the Korean War, his name was paddles, because they used to have these paddles and they would hold them out and they would wigwag these things to show the pilots either they had to turn left or right, or if they were high, then they had to come down onto the glide slope, which is basically visual. Now everything has got a what we call a Fresnel lens on the left side of the carrier deck in the landing area, about 2/3 of the way down of the canted deck, angle deck. And there the pilot learns to fly what they call the meatball. So there'd be the datum line where there's like 3 green lights, then there's a big yellow light, okay, and then another 3 green lights. And the idea is to keep that amber light centered all the way to touchdown. Just focus on what we call the meatball, okay? So I was qualified to be an LSO. Actually, I was PAC Fleet LSO, which meant I was qualified to wave all the airplanes that were on our carrier. And we carried like 85 airplanes. And we had F4s, A6s, A7s, the A5 Vigilante, and occasionally the A3 Sky Warrior, which also served as a tanker. So I did that for 6 years, and the call for getting out and joining the airlines is what I decided I was going to do. But I got out of the Navy on December the 31st of 1973, and the next day I'm a reservist in the U.S. Navy Reserve. So I stayed in the reserves. I was very fortunate. I had a really good career. I wound up making captain before I had 20 years in, and I worked 5 years for 3 stars, the war plans officer, which was a lot of fun, gave me a lot of opportunity, in which one time I went out on a nuclear-powered attack submarine for 2 days, and this was when the navigator, who was a lieutenant commander, had to qualify to shoot torpedoes. And this was on the outside of San Clemente, and they would send a barge out there who would have these dummy they looked like torpedoes, but what they did is when they turned them loose, they made sounds like it was a destroyer, and it would go at about 30 knots. So the navigator had to set up an attack, and it was just like the movies that you've ever seen about submarine. Bearing, mark, come left, turn right. Okay, stand by to fire. And then when they fired torpedo number one, it's like a freight train leaving the station, and the whole ship or the boat rumbles and shakes. And then you hear this really high-pitched sound, which is the propeller on the back of the torpedo, and it's wire guided. Okay, so he has to shoot two of these things, and then he has to take evasive action as if he was in enemy territory. So that was quite exciting and a lot of fun. So that was just one of the things I got to do. And then after I had been in as a captain for 6 years, I'm considered a senior captain, I was selected to be the commanding officer of TAC Group 1, which is in the Air Force. If you're a group commander or a wing commander, it's usually a senior rank for either a colonel in the Air Force or a captain in the Navy. And with that, although I'm wearing the eagles of a captain, my title is Commodore, because going back to the Continental Navy of 1775, everybody who was in charge of a ship, in essence, was a captain, but somebody had to be in charge of everybody, the ships. So it came to be that if you had a squadron of destroyers, submarines, multiple squadrons of airplanes, you were called the Commodore. You still had the Eagles, okay, but within your units, my staff and both squadrons, they would call me the Commodore. So this would be, nobody would be confused about, well, the captain said this. It also showed up in World War II when they used to have these convoys going across the North Atlantic. They would have a covey of tin cans, destroyers, like you saw the Tom Hanks movie Greyhound. Okay, he was actually the Commodore. He was the captain of his ship, but he was also in charge of the movement of the other destroyers, who also had captains, but they could be lieutenant commanders or commanders. So he was the Commodore. So that's what I did until I retired, and I had about 28 years. I wound up with 196 carrier landings. Okay. And some great memories, okay? But in the reserves, I mentioned before, I was able to get into the transport business, the DC-9, or what we call the C-9B, and I was able to fly out to Wake Island 3 different times that I was able to operate. One time I got off the airplane and stayed for 17 days, and that was marvelous experience. So then after I got out of the active duty Navy, I managed to get hired as a pilot, and I moved into the right seat of a 707 charter operation out of Boeing Field up in Seattle. So that was kind of stepping stone as I gained experience with some of the old salts that flew those airplanes. And by the time I was 30, I was a captain on a 707, and we were based in Berlin. Basically, what our contract called for was the Germans, their worker unions have a contract that says that their companies have to provide them with a vacation and the means to get there. So basically, we would fly out of Tegel, which is one of the airports there on the French side of Berlin, which was still a divided city then, and I would fly to any place there was sunshine. We down to Italy, we went to Austria, we went into Spain, okay, Valencia, all along the Alicante. We also went to the Echo 8, Echo Alpha 8, going to Tenerife, Lanzarote, Gran Canaria, and stuff like that. So we'd fly down there, dump the people, pick up the people that we brought the week before, fly them back to Berlin, and that's what we did. So that was fun. And then I later moved back to the States and wound up working for commercial airlines. I was with a little company called Air California out of Orange County. And then we got gobbled up by a big guy called American Airlines in 1987. So I was a captain for them, flying mostly domestic then. And then I went down to Miami. That's where I got the orange shirt. This is a Florida Contest Group shirt. And so, so they've got my call sign here. This is CX7TT. So I was a member when I was working out of Miami, flying the 7576 down into South America. I used to do aeronautical mobile coming out of Santiago about 10 o'clock at night, because shortly after takeoff, you're over the Pacific for about 2 hours with nothing happening until you coast in over by Lima. So I would get on the air, and the 767 had a dual head but one transmitter, and it had a helically wound coil in the leading edge of the vertical stabilizer. That was the antenna. So this would be sunrise in the Middle East. So I would be working, the DX would be calling me. My call then was let's see, by that time I changed from KT6V in like 1997 and became K6CT, CT being my first two initials. And so the Europeans would call me, the people in the Middle East would call me. It was a lot of fun. Plus, when I'd fly over the pond, the North Atlantic, I had friends back in San Diego, K6UA, W6RR, who, by the way, was a B-25 pilot in World War II. Gordon Marshall, super guy and a great pilot to survive flying up to Romania when they were bombing those oil storage depots up there. So anyway, I would fly over the Atlantic. And usually in the middle of the night, if the other guy's flying and I'm monitoring the radio, there's about 45 minutes between each reporting point. So I could get on and work some DX or just talk to my friends. So I wound up mandatory retirement. It was age 60 back then. Now it's age 65. And on one of my last flights, I met the love of my life. We got married after I retired, and we moved to Uruguay, which is where I was CX7TT. 2 years into living in Uruguay, it turns out that I get a phone call from a company in the Middle East with a call sign as Alpha 6, and they wanted me to come be an instructor on the 777, because I'd spent 4 years as a check airman at American Airlines on the 7576, but I was also a captain on the 777. So we went to Dubai, and we'd be there for 89 days, and then we'd have 3 weeks off, come back to Uruguay, where we're in the process of building a home, which allowed me to make sure we had a proper grounding system all the way around the property, and it would tie into the rebar base with another ground rod before they poured the concrete. So I started operating there. We were in Dubai for 13 months. We came home, and there was just nothing going on in aviation for about 2 or 3 years. And then in 2010, I got a phone call from somebody that makes airplanes up around Seattle. And they said, how would you like to be a 787 instructor? And I said, that sounds good. So I wound up going to Singapore with my wife. And of course, we train in pairs. And we take turns switching from one seat to the other, because we have to be able to fly from either seat as an IP. So we spent 7 weeks in Singapore, and I was rated as a captain with the FAA. Came back to Boeing, and then had to go to knife and fork school to learn how to be a simulator instructor the way they want us to be. This particular company, every instructor is captain qualified and has to remain that. So we got a check ride every year at the captain level, which was fun. Okay. And then we started going all over the world. I went to Qatar, I went to Doha, I went to Singapore, I went to Gatwick, I went to Shanghai, of course in Miami, and then this was after they moved all the simulators out of Boeing. So I did that for a number of years, and then I was invited to be one of the first check airmen for a company that is in Incheon, where the call signs are Hotel Lima. Okay, so we went through training there. With them, we had to completely learn. I knew the airplane, but every airline has its own what we call mouth music. Okay, the way they do their checklist and what they say and when they say it, and whether it's the captain response or the first officer response. So we had to learn all that. So I spent 5 years in Incheon. I would work about month on, month off. So I'd work about 5 months, sometimes 6 months a year, and commuting back and forth. And I had my K2GO with me. And my good friend, Mike, W4RN, has got 3 towers in western part of Virginia. And he had some wonderful equipment there. And so I was able to tie in and run multi-2 from over there. During COVID, okay, I was able to operate I was there for 3.5 months because I had to get out of Panama because we were under lockdown here, where guys could go out for 2 hours a day on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, and the ladies could go out on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. Okay, it's really kind of funny when you see nothing but guys in the grocery store, and they all have their cell phone, and they're taking pictures so they can ask your wife, which one should I pick? It was hilarious. Okay, it was a lot of fun. Not COVID, that wasn't fun. But I managed to get out of here on an expatriation flight after about 2.5 months of being here in the apartment, but I had ham radio, so that was okay. I got back over to South Korea, and we had to go through 2 weeks of quarantine. They put us in a hotel room, and you had to do the mask thing. They would come by in these biohazard suits once a day and take your temperature and sometimes do the rotor-rooter, okay, for the check for COVID. It was a miserable time, but it was only 2 weeks. And then after that, we went back to instructing, where everybody's wearing masks. I washed my hands. My mother, who had passed away, would have been ecstatic the number of times I washed my hands, just like when I was a little boy. Okay, but we were very, very clean. We had special sprays. We'd spray the briefing room. I would go into the simulator. I'd spray the handrests. I'd spray the throttle quadrants, all the stuff that the incoming students and I would be touching. And then once we left, as a courtesy, I'd spray it all again for the next instructor and his students to come in there. So I did that until 2022. And the company had decided that they wanted to do something and set it up as aviation operational safety support. And I was invited to join that team. There's about 19 of us now, but there was about 23, 24 when it started. And we went back, and it was just basically a school on how to conduct an audit and do a report, etc. So since 2022, what I do is we usually go out with a team of five of us, and we visit these airlines around the world. They have to invite us. We just don't show up. They invite us, and when we go there, okay, we meet all the higher-ups, the head of training, the head of flight standards, head of everybody, safety department, and we sit down and talk to them, and then I start writing the jump seat, okay? In many cases, they want me to have my uniform, so I put on my captain stripes, and all I do is sit in the jump seat and observe, okay? I can talk to them, but I don't instruct, okay? I don't instruct, I just watch what they do and see, are they in compliance with their published standard operating procedures, okay? So after about 18 days, we have enough data points. And if we find that there's some things that they could do better or should be doing, that's in the report. And then the company will send pilots who are still under the age of 65 will then ride in one of the seats. They may be in the left seat or the right seat, depending on what they're going to be doing. So they'll do that for a number of months. Some of them are 3 months, some are 6 months, some as long as a year, until they feel that everybody is up to standards, okay? Help them rewrite their manuals so they're up to code for either the FAA outside of the U.S. is basically called NAA, the Nation Aviation Authority or National Aviation Authority. In Europe, it's called EASA. It's the equivalent of the FAA. So they have to be up to standard there. And then after about a year, after that team has left, we leave the airline alone. And then we show up about a year later to just see is whatever we gave them, has it still stuck to the wall or is it sliding down the wall? Okay. So I've done, about 10 of those over the last few years. As a team, we've done 50 different airlines all over the world. And in the middle of June, I'm going to Jakarta to do a final check for another airline there. So I'll be there for about 3 weeks in Jakarta, which is a delightful place. I really like the people there. It's a nice experience. So that's what I do. Last year I worked 54 days. Okay, I haven't worked since last August. Okay, but now I'll be going out in June, maybe work one more time. So it's perfect. So it keeps the gray matter moving around, sloshing around up there, because all these guys are way younger than me, because I'm 80 years old, okay? And there I am wearing 4 stripes. And there's guys, captains that are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and first officers that are, 25, 35, something like that. So it keeps the juices flowing. Okay? Unfortunately, a lot of these places, they don't take the radio because there's not too many hotels that still have windows that open, okay? So that's what I've been doing. Okay, ham radio wise, I started with the remote operations around 2011 or 2012. And my good friend, Mike Lonicky, W4RN, said, let's get this thing set up so that for the first time as a CX7TT, I could actually use my call sign in sweepstakes. I have a club called W4 Yankee Yankee. So I'd actually sign into his place and run the sweepstakes and get a full sweep on CW with his station. So we did quite a bit of that. When we first got there, there was a really well-known guy named Jack, K4 Victor. He's really famous in PVRC. He's a super guy. I did not get to meet him, but he had 3 big Berthas with Christmas trees, okay? And he had an outbuilding from his regular house where there was I think there was 4, either 3 or 4 operating stations there where guys could drive out and operate. And of course, I could come in from Uruguay and operate remote. Fantastic experience to have big iron, these beautiful towers. They were unbelievable. Unfortunately, he passed away. So Mike was kind of the custodian of everything. And he was able to buy some stuff from his widow and move it to his place, where we just kind of recreated a multi. I think we were mostly multi-2 when he was real active with it. Okay, so did that for quite some time. Ham radio wise, here it was difficult because the HOA forced me to take down any kind of decent antennas, but I had a good friend that is kind of a general manager and also a shareholder of a marina over on the Atlantic side. And that's where I was using my call sign HO2T, which is a fantastic location. The Panama Canal water is right there. And where I was operating, I'm probably 25 feet from salt water. And the antennas really play well. Really had a lot of fun. So since that time, I've been operating up in Seoul, which is a bunch of hills, probably about an hour and a half from here, where there was a New Yorker came down and set up a nice station. And he's got a 72-foot motorized crank up with this big multi-band antenna up there. And he's at 2,600 feet elevation, dead quiet up there, and he has really nice equipment. So I think I may have mentioned that last year, CQ Worldwide Sideband, I kind of went there. I didn't go, I went there and mentored the guys as they were operating. I did some operating, kind of show them how to run a phone contest and a pileup, and to teach them pileup etiquette, how to do that correctly, etc. So that's on the board. Here's a good one for you. About 2 days after Part 1 interview, I get an email from a guy who says, I'm just now leaving Panama and I saw your interview, and you and I know a lot of the same people when you were out on the West Coast, when I mentioned San Diego DX Club, etc. And I remembered when he said his call, I remembered who he was. I'd never met him, okay, but he had set up really nice stations about 4 different places around the United States as he's traveled around. So he's now retired, and he had been down here looking for a place so he could set up. Well, since then, he has found a beautiful location. he showed me the HFTA, the terrain analysis, and he has got an incredible drop off. And he's about 4 hours from the city, so he'll be radio quiet, looking at where his place is going to be. In fact, he bought the place, and then tomorrow, he and his wife are coming in to go up there and to set up a builder and a contractor. And he is, an architect and a builder. And he wants to have a 2-tower station up there by the next contest season. Okay. So you may hear us signing in the contest as HP6. Okay. By the way, WPXCW is coming up at the end of May, and I may be on with a different call sign. If you look at what's available, there's HP, HO, H8, H9, 3 Echo, and 3 Foxtrot. I will be on using one of those, but not HP1XT. That's something to look forward to.
So, Tom, I'd like to take advantage of the fact that I have you back on camera again. You've obviously had decades of experience operating ham radio around the world. Give me your perspective on remote operating. You've had early experiences with that. How have you seen that evolve, and where do you think it goes from here?
I think it's absolutely fantastic, because the guys that are with the little guys that have attic antennas or little flagpole antenna out there can now experience the real fun of being in a contest with real equipment, big equipment. In the old days, I operated from K3LR. There was 12 of us there. That's obviously a huge demand on resources, on, you got to leave on Thursday and leave Sunday night or Monday morning, etc. So now you can do it from home. Okay. So I think it's really good, not only for the access to resources, but there's still a camaraderie. You're not exactly in the room, but you've got a different ways. It's not WhatsApp. I forget. There's 2 or 3 types of WhatsApp that guys will use. So you can basically, sign in, or as you're observing, you can make good comments when a guy, gets a 9 Victor on 160 meters or something like that. So I think it's going to encourage a lot of people. One of the things that I've found that has been really exciting in the last 5 years, maybe more, is getting the youth involved. Because you remember the old days when you saw pictures, it was all guys that looked like me, old fat guys sitting around talking about the same stuff. But now with this emphasis on bringing in the youth, YOTA, etc., and I'm pretty sure in this last year, some of the contest operators down in the Caribbean have allowed their guys to come down there and operate their stations, and with some of them even remotely being able to operate, PJ or P40, those guys, and have that experience. And I've seen some of the write-ups, and they seem really excited about it. So I'm a huge fan of remote because it allows more people to get involved. And to get involved, whether or not they're going to be in contesting. Because there are some of the stations that are out there that you can just sign on and operate. You can do your FT8 or sideband or CW or whatever. Okay, so I think it's very positive. I've reached the stage where I'm kind of past climbing towers. It's going to be a real effort to put anything up on the roof, which is 2 floors above me, for May, but I'm going to work on it. And BIC is pretty important at this time. I did a multi-station, ARRL CW. I'm sorry, ARRL sideband. And there was 4 of us, and we said, well, let's do this for us old guys. How about we do 2 hours on and 6 hours off? And at the end of the contest, they said, that was fantastic. It was absolutely great that we could have 6 hours to go do something else, and we were remote, okay? So I think it has a lot to promote for ham radio and to keep it alive and keep it growing. The other thing that I think really has helped out is CW Ops, okay? I can't remember. I know the charter was signed in 2009 by Jim, N3JT, okay? Super guy. I've been to his house. Okay, he always finds me in a pilot. I really appreciate that. However, how I got involved was my good friend Scott Wright, K0 Mike Delta. You may have heard of him. He sends me an invite, and I'm in Uruguay. So he says, "Hey, we're putting this together, and I thought about you, get involved, and if you got anybody else you think would be good for a startup." And so my number is 518. I got Fred, K9 Victor Victor, NP2X. He's now a PJ4, I think. He's in Bonaire right now. He just moved there. And then Mike, W4RN. I think he's number 585. And so that started around 2010, 11, 12. I can't remember exactly when. And then they came up with this CW Academy. That was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And the dedication from the guys that do this, that teach this, that get on certain time, every time during the week to build up the CW aspects of this. And as soon as they can, the students can get to, I think, is 25 words a minute and carrying on a conversation, they can be inducted into the membership. Well, there's I think they just passed, or if they're not, they're real close to 4,000 members in CW operations. And I just think it is fantastic when you've got the lifeblood of guys who maybe only doing FT8, okay, or sideband or AM or whatever, have the opportunity to get back on the air, learn CW, feel comfortable with it. And that's another breeding ground for CW operators for contest. I think it's fantastic.
So, Tom, speaking of teaching, you obviously are a mentor. I mean, your aviation career, you've been teaching and mentoring people. You talked about mentoring people at the contest station. What kind of advice would you give here on camera to newcomers to the contesting world?
Start small. When I mean that, don't throw them into the briar patch in CQ Worldwide CW. Okay. This past weekend was CQMM, which is CWJF. That's Brazilian, okay, and it's JF is the shorthand for Juiz de Fora, which is a small town on a river that in the 17 or 1800s they were mining gold up around Minas Gerais, which is now Belo Horizonte, and they would ship the gold down that river, and that's where the little town was. Okay, well, it flourished, even though the gold ran out. Belo Horizonte is the Denver of Brazil. That's where their gemstones come from, the tourmaline and all those beautiful rocks the ladies like to wear, etc. I used to fly in there, so that's how I know that. So down that river is the Juiz de Fora. And in 1985, I forget the guy's call sign, but a PY4AG, I can't remember exactly. He decided he was going to start a little CW club. So he started working on it. And by 1987, he had 17 members. Okay. So then they started, they would have these little contests to get on the air and operate, whatever. And the other states, there's 26 states in Brazil, including the federal district. So they started having similar to a sweepstakes in about 1993, 94, where they had all 26 states were involved in their little sweepstake operation. Well, the other countries in South America said, well, why not us? So they went, yeah, okay. So by the late 90s, all of South America would get on in their own party, okay? And then they go like, the rest of the world, well, what about us, okay? So then I think it was 2010, 2011, they said, okay, the rest of the world can get on. And they were really brilliant about this because you can join, you'd be a lifetime member of CWJF for $50. That's it, one time, and you're there. And what that does is the exchange is 599 NA or NAM for member, and which means that when you work me, you get 10 points, which works in Pileups, okay? When they hear the N or you're spotted as a NAM. And there's a lot of U.S. guys that have put down the bucks so they can get the higher scores. I worked a fair number this last weekend, even though conditions were not too good. So with CW Ops and the remote operations and the sponsoring and mentoring of the young people, I think it says nothing but good things for the future of ham radio. Furthermore, with how you mentor is go slow with a small contest. Another one that would be good for coming up is, well, maybe the QSO parties would work. In addition to that, you've got the IARU, which is a 24-hour contest, okay, Saturday morning to Sunday morning. And that will be good. There'll be a lot of operations, okay, because you got WRTC in Britain showing up. So I think there's a lot of that. The other thing with mentoring is anybody knows a lot of patience, a lot of patience. I'll tell you one quick story. One of the guys I was mentoring at the sideband station is a South African guy, super guy, just a great sense of humor, right? And I walked in there, and what he was doing, he was trying to get somebody in a pilot, okay? And he had typed in Yankee November so-and-so. So I'm sitting there, and I'm listening as he's calling and trying to see that his timing is good, okay? So he's not calling when they're talking or at the wrong time, etc. And all of a sudden he goes, I got it. So I hear on the radio that YN gave him zone 15. That's zone 7. And I said, where'd you get that? What is that? He says, oh, well, I worked as YN. Yeah, I said, that can't be. That's not YN, okay? And when I kept listening, okay, and then I heard who he had worked, and I said, change that, okay? You got it. It's Yankee. I forgot what it was. I said, erase that. And he had written YN. I said, erase that YN, okay? YN. And I keep looking, and it's still there in the log page. And he looked at me and he said, well, I've done it. And I looked at it, and I looked at the log page for the first time, okay? And I see YN written out, WHYN. YN. Oh, everybody, there was like 4 of us there. We had to stop. We were laughing so hard. It was so funny. And he looked at me and he says, you damn Americans don't know how to speak English.
Hey, Tom, I want to go back to this contesting mentoring idea. What are the biggest differences you see at the veteran level compared to, say, an intermediate contester? What are the skills that you see at that top level that people have developed that would be helpful for people to hear from you?
Well, I'm sure every contester on this that watches this thing that says, you got to stop calling. Okay. It's very frustrating. Okay. Especially if it's a new guy. I'll give you an example. There's a fairly new Hotel Papa 1 that was on in the ARRL sideband contest, okay? And I ran across him Saturday afternoon, and he was really loud, obviously, here, but I was remoting in from up in, Virginia or North Carolina. And it was impossible to work this guy because the pileup just kept going with their calls. And he would just stop. He wouldn't say anything. And then maybe he was working one guy about every 2 or 3 minutes, okay? So I came back on Sunday, okay, and the pileup wasn't so bad. And I've learned from a lot of guys, don't ever call on their frequency. Move off the frequency. Make your voice sound different, okay? And I did that. And he came back to me after about 3 calls. And I worked the guy. And then when his contest was over, I looked him up in QRZ and I sent him an email. So he calls me on Monday morning. We spent an hour and a half on the phone. And it turns out that, he lives in California. He comes down to visit his sister. He had 100 watts to a dipole out on a balcony, etc. And he was just flummoxed. He was just overwhelmed with the cacophony of noise, etc. So I said, well, can I give you a suggestion? He says, well, sure. I said, well, are you familiar with the RIT? I said, the receiver incremental tuning. He goes, yeah. I said, let me tell you a story. When I was in Charlie X-ray, I would have the same thing. I'd work the high bands, and usually toward the end of the contest, I'd go down to 20 meters, and I was fresh meat with about 2 hours left to go in the contest. And the U.S., the Canadians are just powering into Montevideo at the time. So I just learned to I'd bring down my filter as tight as I would get it, and then I'd move off up, and I'd hear a guy, I could get maybe 2 or 3 characters of his call. And then after the herd figured it out, they'd come up, I'd go to the other side of the frequency and work them there. And he said, I never thought of that. I said, okay, well, I've been doing this for quite a long time, etc. So one thing is learn the timing, because I hear people calling at the wrong time. One of the things that I really like about CW, and I'll tell you there's some really good CW operators out there, and I'm going to name 2 who always get me on the first call. Always, because they know that somewhere that my hearing likes the 900 to 1,000 hertz, okay? One of them's K2GO. He come through, bam, just one time. And the other guy is my really super friend, Terry, N6 Charlie Whiskey. He knows me like a book. He was the one that introduced me to contesting back in 1979, 1980. So those are some of the things is move around, be different. Okay? Sometimes you can change your code speed, okay? Maybe slow it down, especially if they seem confused. There's in that CQMM contest, there's a lot of Brazilian novices that get on, and they're just overwhelmed by high-speed code. So I'll drop it down. Usually I stay around 28 when I'm calling CQ to get guys to work me. But sometimes I'll go down as low as 22 words a minute and then send H, P, 1, etc. And I'm successful. It takes me longer to do it, but he's a multiplier, so I do it. So listening, timing, be careful about tail ending. One of the things that it just bugs the heck out of me is guys just don't stop calling. They just don't stop calling. I had this happen to me by a well-known multi-station somewhere up in the United States, okay? And after the contest, I sent him an email. I said, this is what this guy did. He would not stop calling. And he was very nice. He sent an email back and he says, Tom, thank you so much for bringing this to my attention. He's a fairly new guy. Obviously, I need to spend more time training him, etc. And I thought, that was real cool. I liked that a lot. So I hope that helped.
Well, I think that's a good start. I think you've got more, though. What other mistakes do you see happening, Tom? This is good stuff. It really is. I mean, you, with your experience and you've seen a lot, but you also are looking at it from the perspective of a teacher, which I think is really helpful.
One of the best things you can do is get Morse runner. Okay, you got Morse runner, and you can select the number of people that you want calling you. Okay, I'll tell you another quick story. Okay, I went to Porek, Croatia, last October.
I hope to go there this year. Yeah.
You missed a good one. We had so much fun. I was there with Rich NN3W, who's going to go to a WRTC as a fellow PVRC guy. There was N3UA and WB2, and name is Todd, and he's going to be really angry that I don't remember the rest of his call sign. The four of us from PVRC showed up. I flew into Venice, and Rich flew into Milan. He rented a car. I took the train around the corner to Trieste, and he stopped by the train station and picked me up, and we continued down. So we got there Friday afternoon, probably about 3 in the afternoon. We check in, go out on the outside patio. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's like Southern California, blue skies, beautiful temperatures there around the 10th of October. And there's a bunch of the Europeans sitting there, Croatians and Slovenians, and there's about 3 or 4 of them. So we get down, there's about 5 of us there, and this guy's sitting next to me. Okay, we introduce ourselves, and I don't know who he is. Okay, his name is Bracco, and we start talking. And about 20 minutes later, he says, "Tom, can I get you something to drink?" And I said, "Yeah, well, whatever you got." He says, "Oh, I've got some homemade moonshine." I said, "Oh boy." That may take the enamel off my teeth. So he goes off to his room. He comes back with a mason jar with this clear stuff in it. It pours me a little bit, and I taste it. It's delicious, absolutely delicious. We had a great conversation, right? So the next morning, the conference starts, and one of the first guys up there is this guy, Bracco. Well, he's the guy that set the record at D4C in 2024. And I thought, my God, this was unbelievable. Okay, very cool guy. So what he does is he explains how he got ready to go to D4C and challenge MJ for the record. And it was amazing how much time he spent a day with two different Morse runners, one in the one ear, one in the other, and two different keyboards there, just going. So one of the things I would certainly recommend for CW contesters is get the Morse runner and spend 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon. You can set the time as much as you want on it. There's also another program that slips my mind where it sends call signs. These are legitimate call signs, okay? And as you get the call sign correct, it sends faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And I find it really helps me, because if I do it, consistently, I'll be up to, 42, 44 words a minute. And then if I wait a while to come back, then the best I would do would maybe be 36 or 38. So I know I need more time on the machine then. But those two programs, I think, are excellent. Phone, sometimes it's just brute force. Brute force on your signal and the timing. That's the only thing. And don't waste too much time, okay? Because they're going to be, if you think it's a multi-station, they'll be there Sunday and they'll be begging for contact. So don't spend too much time in the pilot. Try to get in and out, do some of the tips, high, low, whatever, to see if you can get some timing in there that's just right, okay? And then go from there.
And for the record, Brazzo is E770X. He's been on Q5 a number of times. So if anybody's hearing this story, it's E770X. Great guy. And I think it's a great advice to listen to some of those top operators. Tom, as per usual, per our last experience, we're at 45 minutes, so we're running out of time. But I do want you to reflect upon 60 years in the hobby. What are the takeaways after all these decades in ham radio?
Well, that's a great question. I started ham radio when I was 13 or 14 years old. I think my check date for sweepstakes is 1959, and I was born in 45. Okay. As the friends that I've made, okay, the friends that I'm meeting more of them. I'm going to Dayton this year. I haven't been to Dayton since 2000. Okay, and I'll be at the CW Ops. I'll be at the contesting dinner, etc. And so I'm looking forward to getting an eyeball QSO with a lot of people that I've worked over the time. But it's one of these hobbies that I've never gotten tired of. It just doesn't get old. I basically have all of these career paths: a ham radio career, a Navy career, a working pilot career, and then the instructor pilot after I'm too old to fly career. But ham radio is still here, and I still get excited about it. There's times like when I was on in the contest, remote into North Carolina and Virginia, where I would just I'd get in the groove and just working guy after guy, and the 2-hour period would flow by. Okay. And if I didn't have a relief, I could just keep going maybe 3 and 4 hours because I was just enjoying myself. But it's the camaraderie. Okay. The other thing that I see now is there's much more instruction going on in the higher levels of radio, whether it's QEX magazine or Nathan W2, I forget his name, the professor, and the lady that does the propagation results. Tim LR usually gets her at one of these things and gets her up there. And it's all fascinating stuff, okay? It's really intriguing to be part of a community of friends that, one of the friends that I contested with back in the British Virgin Island in the early 1980s is K1RX. We're still great buddies, okay? I have a little bit more hair left than he does, but we're really good friends. And I always, when I hear him, I always make sure I swing by and work him in a contest, etc. But it's the camaraderie and it's the community and the things that we do to make it a strong purpose, and can change. You've got the guys that do this emergency stuff with floods and hurricanes and tornadoes and stuff like that. Ham radio is for everybody. Remember, we used to get angry on 20-meter sideband when slow scan TV guys would get on there and mess up the channels, and then there's CW and then sideband. I remember the old days, they were called the sidewinders, okay, and the AM was the only way. And I was guilty as charged. I had a DX100B, and my TR4, what I bought when I went to instruct in Meridian, Mississippi, was my first sideband piece of equipment. So you've got all the different things. You've got the FT8, FT4. I dabbled in FT8. I think it was around 2017 or 18 when I had my K3 here. I set up for it. I didn't know anything about it, okay? And I found that there was a guy, he was a ZL, who had a tutorial that was about 7 or 8 pages long that was indispensable. And it had a lot of techniques. So a lot of people think is all I do is hit a button, my computer works your computer, my radio works your radio through the computer, blah, 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 boring, boring, boring. There is technique involved, okay? You can still know where to put your signal on this stuff. Well, I used it, I worked it for about, I had 166 countries, okay? The most fun is I had 36 countries on 60 meters, okay? Which back then, there was hardly nobody on 60 meters. And I had my in-fade fed halfway, 132 feet hanging out the window. And I could tune it for 60 meters. And I was working Europeans with that crazy antenna on 60 meters. And that was a thrill. That was kind of fun. But you got all kinds of things. Guys got the UHF, VHF. I've probably got the one and only moon bounce with Lance, W7GJ, I think he is. He calls me, sends me an email and said, this was like November of some year. He said, I've looked at all my projections and there's a possibility that I can moon bounce from, I forget whether he lives in Idaho or Montana, and work you in Uruguay be the first moon bounce. And I said, I'm on. He said, I'll send you the software. And I can remember sitting at my desk in Montevideo looking out, and I'm seeing this huge moon that's probably about 30 degrees above the horizon at about 9 o'clock in the morning. And we start sitting, and it took us about 45 minutes because I had a stepper, okay, with a 6-meter thing on it, where everybody else is using these 15 element and they can change the azimuth. He said, we just got to wait for the right lobe to get the moon back to me. So what's it, 256,000 miles there and back? And I thought, that was unbelievable.
I've got to tell you, I look at you with that smile and the enthusiasm, and I see that 14-year-old ham radio operator. You're the best advertisement for ham radio. Tom, I really appreciate you coming back and joining me today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Take care.
And I'll see you in Dayton. Q5 will have a booth alongside the DX Engineering booth. We'll be at the contest dinner, Contest University, so I look forward to meeting you in person.
I'll wear one of my ball caps.
My name is Kevin Thomas, W1DED. This has been Q5 Ham Radio. I've been talking the second time with Tom K2GO. You'll see him in Dayton if you attend. 73.
73.